everyone, this is the fourth in the series of Mincha scenarios, and today I'd like to deal with the point of view that says that the cutoff time for Mincha is not sunset, Shkia, but rather Tzeit HaKochavim, literally nightfall, past sunset all the way to nightfall. And the authors of this opinion are not lightweights but heavyweights, as I will explain. As you recall from last time, the main source for those that say that Mincha's cutoff time is sunset is because of the Gemara in Zvachim Daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph 56a that says you can no longer throw the blood from the sacrifice of the Ben Korban Tamid Shel Ben HaArbaim, upon which our Mincha is patterned, after Shkia, after sunset. And therefore, according to a slew of Rishonim, you cannot go ahead and daven Mincha after sunset. However, if you just turn the page in Zvachim to Nun Vav Amud Bet 56b, there is a Beraita that says there that any sacrifice that you have to eat within that day or within 2 days, the day or 2 days ends at a time called Mishetishka HaChama. And as you recall from last time, Rabbeinu Tam was fond of saying that anytime the Gemara just uses the word Shkia, it means sunset. But if it says Mishetishka HaChama, from when the sun has gone down, it means that the sun has finished to go down and it's already nightfall. And therefore, famously, he says with regard to Hanukkah candles, where it says in the Gemara that the time to light is Mishetishka HaChama, indeed, Rabbeinu Tam there says it means Sof Shkiyat HaChama, namely not sunset, but the end of sunset, which is nightfall. From this perspective, Rabbeinu Tam doesn't say this just on the Gemara, but rather in a very special book that we have called Sefer HaYashar Le Rabbeinu Tam. Ivan sha'avar yom shchitatan enan ritzuyin lizrika de b'yom tzavato ktiv v'nifsal hadam mishaba halayla. That indeed Rabbeinu Tam there says that what the Gemara meant on Nun Vav Amud Aleph Shkiyat HaChama does not mean sunset, but rather it means night. So not only does he explain the Braita on the other page that way, in Sefer HaYashar Le Rabbeinu Tam he explains even the Gemara in Nun Vav Amud Aleph that all those Rishonim relied on. And indeed, lehalacha, it seems that they're not alone. A Tosfos in a different place, and say in Meseches Menachos, indeed says that Yesh Mefarshim, there are those that say that Mina Torah, biblically, the blood of the sacrifice, you can throw it until nightfall. But rather, with regard to Korban Pesach, Avud Harchaka Upasua Mishkiyat HaChama, with regard to Korban Pesach, they made it earlier and they said sunset, so that people that were in far places would make their way to Yerushalayim earlier and not be in a situation where they'll be in what's called a derech rechoka, a far place from Yerushalayim on Erev Pesach, and not be able to bring the Pesach sacrifice. So they made the time earlier to basically induce people to start their trip to Yerushalayim on the eve of Pesach earlier. And therefore, he promotes the point of view that that's only with regard to Korban Pesach. But with regard to all the rest of the Korbanot, the last time you can throw it on the Mizbeach is actually Tzeit HaKochavim or nightfall. Only Midirabanan, he says. They went ahead and said that it's actually earlier. But biblically, it's until nightfall. From this perspective, the Shagas Aryeh comes along and says the whole Shkia thing was only with regard to Korban Pesach. Lo tiknu mishkiyat HaChama ve'elach lo havizman shchita ela bepesach bilvad ve'lo b'shar korbanot. However, rabbinically, they made that same idea with regard to other korbanot, but tfilat derabanan lo gazru ulezeh ta'atinote. And that seems to be my opinion. And therefore he ends and says, Vishma mina mikol ma shekatavti dezman tfilat mincha have ad halayla, that the time to daven mincha is until night, not until sunset, but until the night. Shakas Aryeh and Achron is not alone, just relying on the Tosfot, the Sefer Hamanig, Rav Natan Hayarchi, who was a frequent traveler between the three Jewish centers of his time, which was only Ashkenaz, Sfarad, and Provence, comes along and says that what our Gemara meant, that we quoted so many times, that the halacha is either like Rabbanan or Rabbi Yehuda, when it comes to the Rabbanan's opinion that it's Ad Ha'erev, Hamipalel Tfilat Mincha Tzeit HaKochavim, Avad, he did correctly. The Shibbolei Haleket, another great Rishon from the Ashkenazic world, says exactly the same thing. Namely, if you want to do like the Rabbanan, it means Misha Rotze Lipalel Mincha Tzeit HaKochavim Hareshut Biyado. So from this perspective, as you could see, there is a slew of Rishonim, mainly from Ashkenaz, that come along and say that the cutoff time for Mincha is not sunset, but rather Tzeit HaKochavim. And the famous Gemara is either only with regard to Korbanot, or there's a Gemara countering it, saying that you can actually throw the blood all the way to Tzeit HaKochavim. Well, did anyone paskin like this? La halacha. Actually, another non-lightweight, the RAMA. And allow me to introduce the RAMA with a story. I was in Krakow on a rabbinic convention. We went to the Rama's grave in the afternoon, and then we came back to the rabbinic convention. And usually in these conventions, there's always someone with his watch saying, Shkia, Shkia, we have to daven, Shkia, Shkia, Shkia. Finally, Rabbi David Stav got up and said, I don't understand. You're in the city of the Rama. You just went to his grave, and you're saying the cutoff time for Mincha is Shkia. Because indeed, the Rama says in Shulchan Aruch, we, in Europe, usually daven Mincha before the plug, and Ma'ariv after the plug. However, b'di'eved or b'sha'at atchak, if indeed on a certain day you have no choice, yatsa im mitpalel mincha ad halayla dahainu atzeit hakochavim. In other words, according to the Rama, if you want to not do like Rabbi Yehuda, like he says we usually do, but rather like Rabbanan on a certain day, which is a b'di'eved or sha'at hatchak, whatever it might be, the words of the Rabbanan Ad Ha'erev means Ad Tzeit HaKochavim, until the stars come out. Indeed, the Mishnah Bura says that in his humble opinion, both the Shulchan Aruch, here I humbly disagree, but definitely Harama, D'Ledidan Nohagim Mitpalel Ma'ariv Achar Tzeit HaKochavim, Mutar Litpalel Mincha Afilu Achar Shkia Ad Samuch LeTzeit HaKochavim, that according to the Rama, for sure, you can daven Mincha till Tzeit, because that's the first time that in Ashkenazi communities they allow them to daven Ma'ariv. So therefore, since the cutoff time is not Shkia, that's not the time they allow them to daven Ma'ariv, but rather Tzeit HaKochavim, thus you can daven Mincha until Tzeit HaKochavim. And indeed, the Sharatzian of the Mishnah Bura explains, as we did, that it could very well be that the famous Rabbeinu Yonah we quoted based on the Gemara in Zvachim was only with regard to Korban Pesach, not with regard to the Tamid. The Tamid could have ultimately been thrown on the Mizbeach up until nightfall, Umimela b'tfilat mincha, yemutar litpalel ad sof shkia. You can daven until nightfall. From this perspective, it's not a surprise anymore for me, though it was at the time, that when I went to Antwerp and I looked at the times for davening, of all the shuls, there was only one shul that said we daven before Shkia. Namely, we finish Mincha before Shkia. All the shuls followed the Rama. Not a lightweight. One who we paskin like almost on everything in Ashkenazic Jewry. Obviously, on this issue, you can paskin that way as well. So from this perspective, you may want to finish by Shkia because of all the Rishonim that said so. But it's 100% legitimate to have a Mincha Ma'ariv after Shkia if needed. We're talking about the Tosfot, the Sefer HaManig, the Shibbolei Haleket, the understanding of the Sharkas Aryeh, but above and beyond all the way the Rama paskins in Shulchan Aruch.